Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Adam from Menta Watches here. Today we have our good friend all the way from Geneva, Switzerland, Sasha Davidoff of the Davidoff Brothers. We wanted to answer a few of your questions that we posed to you on Instagram, so we picked out our 7 favorite. Without further ado, we're going to start with a banger right off the bat. What is your opinion on the John Goldberger 6265 situation? I'm going to give you that one, but before I do, quick brief recap on what happened. Several years ago, Phillips Auction House auctioned off a very special white gold Daytona reference 6265. They nicknamed the Unicorn because it was the only one known, auctioned off by the legendary collector and author John Goldberger, and allegedly the proceeds were donated to charity. There was a little bit of drama surrounding the watch regarding the restoration of it and sourcing original parts for it. The question is being posed because there was an article published by Perescope questioning the authenticity of the watch. What is your take on the situation?
No comment. Just kidding. No, just kidding.
All right, let's hear it.
So, no, Periscope went more in detail.
Right.
The watch had already been kind of brought to light in a before-after type of thing.
Yep.
By New Old Schlock, which is an Instagram account. And so people kind of knew, I mean, kind of inside the collector community, that this watch was basically you were buying a white gold prototype case. My personal feeling on that is that I think that they could have described it a bit better.
Yes.
And said like, hey, it's a unique, authentic Rolex white gold case, but in order to make it a complete watch, Goldberger, like the collector who bought it, you know, sourced the dial and then, like, you know, had pushers made and added a bezel and so on and so forth. I think that
because I think he found the watch in a really poor state. It had already been, parts had been changed and it had been serviced over its life. It was in really poor condition. And
yeah, the dial wasn't good, I think.
Yeah.
The bezel was steel, the pushers were steel, and the bracelet was steel or something like that.
Right.
But the case, middle, case back were white gold.
Right.
And that nobody's contesting. So I don't think it's such a...
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think whenever you're talking about a watch selling for millions of dollars and in such an important watch, there needs to be proper disclosure. If there were parts that were made specifically to restore this watch to its former glory, no problem. You know, it happens in the car world all the time, but disclose it, let everybody know. And I think going forward in the future, when there is such a situation, sellers need to be aware that, you know, disclosure and honesty is the best concept, and always strive to be as honest with your buyer and your audience as possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
Question number 2, thoughts on Cartier. Is it a fad or is it a well-deserved moment as an important timepiece? And I think they're referring to the recent surge in popularity of Cartier, vintage Cartier, and even modern Cartier as well.
So according to research, the Cartier for the first time actually went ahead of Omega in watch sales last year. And people have contested Cartier as a watch brand for years and saying that it's like, oh, it's more of a jewelry brand. And I would say that that is totally wrong, because Cartier has been making wristwatches since the early 1900s.
One of the earliest companies to make a wristwatch.
Yeah.
And
so, like,
and interesting designs throughout their history, always pushed boundaries.
The Santos, Dumont, like all the various tank shapes. Like,
I think it's well deserved.
They didn't make their movements for a long time. They, you know,
not a lot of companies did, though. You know, not a lot of brands did back in the day to start.
But that was was like kind of the norm, and they've always respected, like, you know, to each his own, do their best, and the specialists of each field. And actually today, like, Cartier with like movements from outside Cartier are actually more valuable, the older ones.
Right.
Just like Zenith Daytona is just like, you know, lots of brands like a Patek Philippe with like a Valjoux base, or Le Mania Patek Philippe.
So deserved or not deserved?
I think it's absolutely deserved.
Agreed.
I don't think it's deserved on every single Cartier, and I think that might cool off. And I think it's just going to be the ones that do deserve it, like certain rare models, you know, like desirable shapes.
Yeah.
How many? There's too many to list, like tanks.
Yeah.
And so not every single Cartier, every single size, every single year is going to be collectible. But I think the ones, like, in the end, like long term, I think that the ones that do deserve it will continue to grow.
All right, we're in agreement. Next question, a simple one. Did you guys become dealers to feed the hunger of buying watches? I'll answer first. Absolutely. I started in this business because I wanted to be able to afford buying watches for my own collection, and it was quickly spiraling out of control. So I figured by selling a few watches on the side, I could afford to keep the watches that I wanted for myself. Here we are 10 years later. You?
I think that I couldn't keep up as a hobbyist as well. I was working for a watch company at the time, and my brother as well, when we had kind of like started putzing around with the idea of opening up a vintage watch shop. I think that today, why we're still in the business is completely different to why we started in the business.
Sure.
But, you know, I couldn't have dreamed at what a roller coaster and a ride it was going to be. But I think that it still holds true that I am learning something new every single day. I still like get really excited about certain watches, and never a boring day.
So you do sell watches to feed, your own hunger of buying watches.
The passion is there.
Sure. Okay, next question. If you had $10,000, what would you buy? The same with $20,000. And what would an expert vintage dealer buy with the quote-unquote regular vintage buying customer's budget? And basically, what would you buy at the 10K range? What would you buy at the 20K range? And I'm assuming if you had a smaller budget, as a vintage expert, what would you buy? Like, what's like the, hidden gems that people don't think about too often?
Okay, so if I had only 10K to spend on a watch and I wanted something that was interesting, valuable, had room to grow, and is underappreciated right now, but I would get enjoyment out of wearing, it would probably either be something like a Blancpain Perpetual Calendar, one of the 90s Breguets, which I'm actually wearing now, like a jump hour, something more classic. That answer about a year ago would have been like Rolex sports model 5-digit.
Right.
But I think that market kind of reached its peak.
So you're talking more, though, about sleeper watches that people aren't thinking about right now.
Yeah, but that's what everybody's like looking for.
Right.
Is like the next big hit, the next thing to grow. And so like my advice is like, okay, well, you can still pick up like a gold Blancpain Perpetual Calendar under 10, like, and in good condition.
Right.
Do so. Like, especially Breguet. They have a ton of
Adam
really cool
Piguet and Vacheron, you could get their 90s Perpetual Calendar watches under $20,000.
But that would be for the 20K. So the question was the 10.
But even like a basic, was it 5548 BA, Adam Piguet, Quantium Perpetual, or how do I pronounce it?
Yeah, QP. Let's just say QP.
Let's just say QP. I can't speak
but
French.
I think that those the ones that are interesting to buy are going to be closer to 20.
Okay,
to start.
But you could get in the low to mid teens a regular one, regular yellow gold, white dial.
Yeah, so 100%. That'll be the white matte dial, but the one that I would say is better to buy is the early enamel dial without cracks or something like that.
So I agree with you to an extent. I think in the $10,000 range, though, if you want to stay tried and true, go for a really nice 321 Pre-Moon Speedy, which can be picked up in that range. Yes, I know you don't want to hear it, but Tritium, Sapphire subs, GMTs, Explorers, always good value buys in that range just because it's a great entry point into vintage watches without going full-blown vintage.
But you couldn't pick up any of those below 10K. Now you can.
Sure.
So it might actually be a better time to buy than last year when they were like really popular.
Okay, so fair enough. All right, so this next question parlays with that last one. Sleeper vintage brands, are there any?
Sleeper vintage brands?
Yeah. I don't think there's any.
It's vintage. I think it's neo-vintage brands, like stuff from the 90s right now.
Like you mentioned Blancpain, for example. I think a lot of people...
Breguet, Vacheron, AP, even some like 90s Patek, like that neo-vintage was predominantly like focused on like sports models. I think there's a lot of classic golds, not just time-only stuff, but like little complications, starter complications, power reserves, retrograde dates, big dates, jump hours, star wheels, like, like all that, that kind of range.
Yeah, look at the AP Star Wheel, how much that's grown. I like to think of more of the vintage watch market being kind of cyclical in a sense where it's like something's popular and then it kind of falls out of fashion and then it comes back. So like the Speedmaster used to be very popular, fell out of fashion, came back, so it's the same thing. So I would take a look at brands like Heuer. I would take a look at brands like Gallet, Universal Genève, which were super popular 6-7 years ago, kind of dropped off a little bit and, weren't on the forefront of people's minds. And, they creep back every once in a while. And I can see a push again on all things not Rolex, Patek, AP, Omega.
For more niche stuff.
More niche stuff.
The difficulty of that market is that the reason that you're able to buy these incredibly rare Heuers and such, is because the prices shoot up and people are more willing to sell.
Right.
Right now, if you ask me to find like one of those Carreras with like the logo on the dial,
right, can't.
Impossible to find right now.
But
whereas like when the prices were, like really, really high, people were like, at that price I'll sell, but like now they're like, no, prices are down, I keep it.
Yeah, and I could see all those smaller brand with much lower production making a pushback again. Like I said, all this stuff is cyclical. Okay, next question, and this is a question from a fellow dealer who's a little more newer to the game than us. Any tips on how to build a network to buy from? I'm having more issues buying stock than selling in today's market. I mean, listen, it's a very long-winded question to answer. My best advice is always build relationships. Know what you're selling and know what you're buying, obviously, because you're asking how to find more stuff to buy, but build relationships. I think that's your number one asset as a dealer. People are going to want to do more business with you if you're trustworthy, if you're easy to do business with, if you pay quickly, if you don't create a lot of fuss, if you buy consistently, if you sell consistently. I think it boils down to what your relationship is with another dealer, private, whoever you're buying from, and how consistent you can make that relationship.
So my advice, a bit simpler, would be to specialize a bit, because the number one question when you go to a dealer and you're like, oh, I need to buy some watches, what are you looking for?
Right.
And it's like, I don't know, something nice. You're not going to get anywhere. If you're like, so if I'm saying like, okay, I'm looking only for 321 Speedmasters,
right?
That might be like a hard thing.
People know to contact you for Speedmasters because you built that niche.
Like if it was like a nice Speedy, like I'll know about it because they'll know like, oh, Speedmaster Sasha.
Right.
It's not that complicated. And if it was like some dealers are specialized in 5-digit Rolex, and like so if I have like a nice 5-digit Rolex or whatever, maybe I'll offer it to them. Or I know like some guys are specialized in Cartier, some guys are specialized in Patek, some guys are specialized in Vacheron.
Right.
And so I think that specializing, not that you only sell that, but like having one thing that you're known for at least, will help you, because it'll kind of get people to like contact you whenever they have
and think about you. For sure. That's good advice. So yeah, I think
like, oh, I just sell a bit of everything.
Yeah,
I'll never think of like...
It's a hard question to answer because it's something that takes years and years and years to build upon, but I really think the best advice I could give anybody is just treat people fairly, conduct your business honestly, and build strong relationships. Okay. Yeah, I cut it off at 7 questions or else this would take a very long time to finish. This video would run very long.
Interesting.
We'll do it again. Last question is, with current prices softened, what are your thoughts on great quote-unquote value buys and opportunities maybe at the 5 and 10K modern, neo vintage, or vintage? I mean, we kind of answered that before.
No, 5K, we're now getting lower. I would say, well, 90s,
yep.
14270 Rolex Explorers are now getting, to...
They're cheap down. Yeah, they shot up for a while, the Tritium ones, and now they've back down to that 5K level, which is a great entry point for people.
Tudor subs, Tritium from like the 90s.
Yep.
You still have like a bunch of like time-only Vacheron in gold, time-only Breguet in gold, time-only Patek in gold.
Yeah.
Like the Calatrava, the Vacherons in like kind of like different, different shapes. Like in the 5K range, you can buy.
Yeah, people overlook. There's a lot of good stuff. You can even always just go with a simple but cool and different date just, with like either a Buckley dial or a cream dial or something interesting.
It's almost harder to answer that question for a 5K. Like there's so many choices than like a 25K.
A little bit above 5K, you could also, do a head-only 1803 date 8 President or something like that.
On a strap, yeah.
Right, yeah. So there's a lot of good options in there. My personal favorites, one you mentioned, would be a 90s Tritium Speedmaster.
Yeah.
And something Sapphire Rolex, like an Explorer, Explorer 1, Explorer 2. All right, well, that wraps it up because I cut off the questions after 7. Hey, thank you so much for coming by the office and answering these questions with me. Next time you're in town, we'll film part 2.
Let's do it.
All right, thank you guys. Please remember to comment, subscribe, like all the random YouTube stuff you need to do to help me, but I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Bye.